Chapter 2. The routine established itself not with a rhythm, but with a fracture. It was a hairline crack that ran down the center of our days, widening so slowly, so quietly, that I didn't notice we were standing on different continents until the ocean was already churning between us. I was the provider. That was the role I had been cast in, the steady counterweight to Sarah's helium-filled flight. I had the job, head brewer for Red River Craft Brewing. But the equipment is still being made in China, so company worked out an agreement with BT, Bia Toy Brewing. A all Vietnamese-owned and run brewery started way back in the early 2000s. That was chaotic, hands-on, and the very stuff craft beer was made of. Down-to-earth guys trying to make new and great beers with what they had, which wasn't much. But that's why home brewers are a special breed. The harder the challenge, the more they reveled in it. And this crew was it. Plan is to use their equipment till ours arrived and relocate. My days began at 6 o'clock a.m. before the smog had fully descended, when the sky was a bruised purple color that suggested a sunrise without actually revealing the sun. I would walk out to the alley, passing the pile of ash where the woman burned her trash every morning. The smell was my alarm clock, sweet, acrid, melted plastic. I would book a grab bike on my phone, watching the little green helmet icon inch toward me on the map. The ride to the brewery was a 40-minute meditation on mortality. I would climb onto the back of a Honda Wave driven by a man who treated the laws of physics as mild suggestions. We would merge onto the highway, the wind whipping around my helmet, which was always too small, perched on my head like a plastic yarmulke. We crossed the river, leaving the bubble of Tahoe with its French bistros, lakeside villas, and small groups of stumbling white 20-somethings heading back home after an all-night booze up at some lock-in bar. Something I'd know too well soon enough. An odd sense of arrogance and envy would prick me when seeing them. Part resenting the lack of discipline and representing foreigners poorly to the locals. Part upset I'm missing out and don't have friends like this ever to on all-night benders with. They looked a mess, but they were happy. Together. Aware of some high plane of friendship I'd never know. We crossed into the industrial zone. The landscape changed instantly. The green rice paddies vanished, replaced by a sprawling grid of gray concrete, corrugated iron, and dust. The air here tasted different. It didn't smell of jasmine or cooking pork. It smelled of diesel, unwashed drains, and pulverized stone. The dust coated your teeth within minutes. It settled in the creases of your clothes. The brewery was a sweltering concrete box located between a paint factory and a slaughterhouse. It smelled of malt dust, yeast, and the faint copper tang of blood from next door. It was a loud, aggressive place. I hauled 50-kilogram sacks of German Pilsner malt up a narrow metal staircase until my back screamed and my hands were raw. I fought with Chinese-made pumps that leaked glycol onto the floor, creating slick, sweet-smelling hazards that attracted ants the size of my thumb. Deal was, I'd use their machines and company doesn't have to pay extra for their Vietnamese staff's labor to help me. A one-man show. At first, anyway. I was from a construction background, before that the Army. Hard work is something I know and understood the golden rule of smile and you smile together. Cry and you cry alone. I always had a hyper-enthusiastic attitude there, and even with the language barriers, I ingratiated myself with them, though sweat equity. They physically saw my hard work and would help me out. Price was unlimited beers after work, sometimes during work to fuel you, and talks of my background and my life. Conversations with the production staff amounted to a few words. Okay? I don't know. Why don't you know? Because I don't. Always shouting what limited English they knew to compensate, but understood deeply that they liked me a lot. Any conversations beyond that, then Google Translate would save the day. I'd help out the head brewer with new recipes, techniques, and solutions of brewing problems. New West Coast IPAs, solve stuck fermentations, better hygiene as my offering for their acceptance of me. And then there was Gerald. Gerald Stevens was a 52-year-old warning sign of what happens when you stay in Southeast Asia too long without a purpose. He wasn't a businessman. He was a washed-up English teacher from Leeds who had stumbled into a brewing inheritance and decided he was an entrepreneur. He arrived at the brewery at 10 o'clock a.m., his face already flushed a permanent crimson, a roadmap of high blood pressure and happy hours. He wore polo shirts that were permanently stained with coffee and older, unidentifiable substances, stretched tight over a belly built on cheap lager and indifference. He didn't walk. He shuffled, trailing the scent of stale tobacco and impending failure. "Just get it in the keg, Davy," Gerald would bellow from the catwalk, holding a coffee mug that I knew contained whiskey. "It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be cold. The expats are thirsty, and they don't have palates. They have habits." I later realized with his prickishness that he was right. But the incompetence wasn't the worst part. It was the hands. Gerald treated people like his personal fiefdom, and the female staff like feudal subjects. Forced meetings, nights out with the boss to better understand the beer scene in town, I'd see it. There were two girls who worked the A craft bar in town, Hyen and Mai. The higher end the establishment, the more name tags you'd see on chests. They were young, bright-eyed, and painfully polite. They called him Mr. Gerald and brought him his ice. One of the privileges of being in Hanoi's bar scene for so long was near universal freedom to go behind the bars and see behind the curtain. I saw it that night. A habit. Gerald was guiding Hien past a stack of kegs near the loading dock. His hand didn't rest on her shoulder. It rested low on her hip, his thick fingers squeezing the fabric of her jeans. Hien froze, her smile fixed and terrified, her eyes darting to me across the warehouse floor. I looked away. I needed the job. We had just paid the deposit on the house on Alcoa. We had burned our savings moving here. I told myself it was cultural, or that I was misreading it, or that if I spoke up now, before I had proven my value, I would be fired. Cowardice is a powerful sedative. A few months later, once our tap room and brewery was finally finished, I saw it again. I saw him corner Mai, poached from the bar to our tap room in the cold room. He was pretending to check inventory, blocking the exit with his bulk while breathing gin fumes into her face. She was pressing herself against the racking shelving, trying to make herself small enough to disappear between the kegs. I couldn't look away that time. I walked over and slammed a clipboard onto a table, making a noise loud enough to startle him. He stepped back, blinking, and Mai ran out. New bar staff would always be female, young, pretty. He was the GM, so all interviews went through him. This behavior of touching the staff would keep happening time and time again. And what the fuck was I going to do about it? Nothing? It got to the stage where the girls, if not busy, would come to the brewery side, a hot all-glass enclosed greenhouse-style 1000L brewhouse zoo for people to witness me sweat and struggle as they drank our cold draft beers in happy tranquility that, at least that's not me. They'd join me in the glass sauna to have some peace from him. I decided to go to the board. Gerald had mentioned a board of investors. It turned out to be a single silent partner, Mr. Long, a Vietnamese real estate speculator who owned the building and viewed the brewery as a tax write-off. I met Mr. Long for coffee in a sterile cafe near the Opera House. I showed him the production logs. I told him about the quality issues. And then, haltingly, sweating through my shirt, I told him about the girls. Mr. Long laughed. He lit a cigarette and waved his hand through the smoke. "Mr. David," he said, his voice smooth and uninterested. "Gerald is enthusiastic. He likes the ladies. It is harmless. Just focus on the beer. Focus on the product." Nothing changed. Except Gerald found out. "You're a sensitive flower, aren't you, Davy?" Gerald sneered the next day, leaning over my desk, smelling of stale tobacco and bile. "Trying to stir up trouble? You stick to the beer. Leave the management to the men. From that day on, the brewery became a war zone. He refused to approve my purchase orders for yeast nutrients. He cut the cleaning budget by half. He turned off the extractor fan in the brewery to save money, forcing me to work in 60-degree heat, stepping out the glass doors to get something resembling cool air in that Hanoian dead air. He was trying to break me. He wanted me to quit so he wouldn't have to pay the severance outlined in my contract. While I was fighting a war of attrition in a sweltering greenhouse, Sarah was finding the lifestyle. Sarah was the creative. She was supposed to paint. She was supposed to write. That was the deal we made in Portland after leaving the defense contractor office manager job she had. I worked the grind. She found the soul at last. Semi-retired, we called it. But she didn't find art. She found the tribe. Hanoi has a specific gravity for a certain type of expat. The ones who are running away. The ones who mistake hedonism for culture. The ones who think that because the beer is 50 cents, the consequences are discounted too. Sarah found her people within 2 weeks. They were the lifers, Westerners who had escaped the drudgery of home to live like kings on an English teacher's salary. They were people who had been in Hanoi for 5 years but couldn't speak 5 words of Vietnamese. And why would you? It's a world where gravity itself bends to accommodate and welcome you, if you're white. If you're white, teaching jobs were abundant, well-paid and valued you. If you're white, you had your pick of beautiful Vietnamese girlfriends or boyfriends. If you're white, rent was lower. Apartments were right by the lake and great views, and life was on infinite life mode. You couldn't lose. There was Chloe, a 30-year-old from Melbourne who taught kindergarten at an international school by day and did lines of ketamine in villa bathrooms by night. She was loud, brittle, and had eyes that were constantly scanning the room for something better. There was Mark, late 40s, a South African digital nomad who claimed to be coding an app, but mostly sat in cafes complaining about the humidity, noise, the locals, and how they treat pets or women, and his elegant and beautiful girlfriend always in tow, ironically also kowtowing to his demands like a king. He wore linen shirts that were always unbuttoned 1 button too far, and spoke with the unearned confidence of a mediocre man in a cheap country. There was Alan, the head barman at the tap room, late 20s with a hairline of a 40-year-old Jack Nicholson from Derby. Been bouncing from bars to bars across the UK and wanted to give Asia a shot. A real craftsman and pro. We'd share post-brew day beers, and I'd try to leave before he'd slip into the SOP of drunken indignancy, fights or physical or relational destruction at the tap room, buy hoy or home. There was Peggy, a lovely 40-year-old professional English teacher, a rarity from Leeds who has been teaching English for 5 years and had a sweet tooth for smoking crystal meth. Tens of thousands of them, all together in this town, all wonderful, exciting, kind, and corrupted in their own ways. Bleeding habits into each other with the common unifier of smoking cigarettes and being in a dreamland of experiences waiting for the weekend. They gathered in apartment and villas in Tay Ho, massive, echoey houses with marble floors and high walls that separated them from the burning trash and clucking chickens outside. These were the houses of diplomats or wealthy Vietnamese families who rented them out to foreigners for thousands of dollars a month. Their nights were fueled not just by cheap beer, but by balloons, nitrous oxide sucked from industrial canisters that sat in the corners of bars like scuba tanks, and lines of white powder chopped up on glass tables or E's at 4 a.m., bought from contacts named Mr. T or Lucky on Zalo or Facebook Messenger. I would come home at 6:00 p.m., covered in grime, my ears ringing from the noise of the bottling line, desperate for a shower, a meal, and a conversation that didn't involve fluid dynamics or shouting. Instead, I would find the house full. One night, a month in, I walked in to find the living room transformed. The furniture had been pushed to the walls. The air conditioner was set to 16 degrees, creating an artificial winter that clashed with the humidity outside. The music was a repetitive, thumping music beat that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. Is that Lizzo playing? 3 people I didn't know were sitting on our floor. A guy with a tank top that said, same but different, was staring at the upright fan as if it were a religious apparition. A girl with sunburnt cheeks was crying silently into a cushion. And Sarah was in the center. She was wearing a silk robe I had never seen before. She was holding a balloon the size of a beach ball. She inhaled it, her eyes rolling back, her body slumping against the sofa. She looked blissful. She looked gone. "Sarah?" I said, standing in the doorway in my work boots, smelling of stale beer and sweat. She blinked, coming back to the surface. She giggled, a high chemical sound. "David!" she shouted, her voice distorted and deep from the gas before pitching up again. "You're home! Come have a suck! It's like floating!" She brought in the strays from all-day booze up and the wind down was on our floor. "I have work in the morning, Sarah," I said, stepping over the guy who didn't move. "And so do you. You said you were going to start that series on the lake. You said you needed the morning light." She deflated, letting the balloon hang limp in her hand. Her face hardened. The bliss vanished, replaced by a petulant annoyance. "Ugh! You're so boring," she sighed, looking at me with genuine disappointment. "You bring the vibe down. We were just exploring." Exploring. That was her word for it. Dissociation disguised as discovery. It was during these sessions that she met him. Dewey An. He didn't fit the profile of the expat crowd. He worked in the cafe next to our apartment. It wasn't just a coffee shop, it was the front for his uncle, Mr. Hung, a man known in the neighborhood for lending money at 20% weekly interest and breaking the fingers of those who missed a payment. Dewey An was in his 20s, baby-faced, but with eyes that were old and calculating. He was small, wiry, with a carp and honeycomb pattern tattoo sleeve that disappeared under the sleeves of his tight t-shirts. Shirts with nonsensical English slogans like Fashion Sport, OK Day, or Super. He lingered at the edges of the expat parties, the local friend who could get anything. Weed, a new Honda WAV scooter, a let-off by police if stopped on the road, because of his uncle's connections. He was the fixer, the tour guide to the underworld. I started seeing him in my living room. He would be sitting on the sofa, comfortable, proprietorial, smoking a cigarette and ashing into a bowl I had brought from Oregon. "Hello, Mr. David," he would say, flashing a polite, empty smile. Sarah treated him like a pet project. "Dewey An is so authentic," she would tell Chloe over brunch, while I paid the bill. "He knows the real Hanoi. He's showing me the hidden spots." Then came the visitors, the witnesses to our success. First, it was her college roommates. 3 women from California who treated Vietnam like a budget theme park. They arrived with wide-brimmed hats and lists of must-see Instagram spots. They filled our narrow kitchen with noise and perfume. "You have to work, right?" Sarah asked on the 3rd day, packing a bag for Ha Long Bay. "We'll be fine. Just a girls' trip. You stay here and make the beer. We'll send photos." I stayed. I brewed a pale ale that tasted of grapefruit and resignation. I liked their photos on Instagram. Images of them jumping off a boat into emerald water captioned, "Ash, living my best life." Then, her parents, Bob and Linda. They came for 2 weeks in November. I took 2 days off to show them the city. I took them to the Temple of Literature. I bought them pho ga at the famous spot on Bat Dan Street, waiting in line for 20 minutes while they complained about the heat. But for the rest of the time, I was at the brewery. Gerald was pushing for a new product launch, a Red River Red Ale that was proving difficult to clarify, and the work pressure was suffocating. Every batch and beer for the next year has to be perfect. A success. We uprooted our lives for this. They went to dinner without me. They went to the spa without me. They drank cocktails on rooftops while I, unclogged, stuck mashed tons from my own miscalculations. "We're going to Da Nang for the second week," Linda told me over a dinner I was paying for at a French bistro near the Opera House. She smiled that tight, brittle smile she used to cover up awkward truths. "Sarah says the beach is healing. She needs the salt air. She's been looking so tired, David." I looked at Sarah. She didn't look tired. She looked wired. She was checking her phone under the table, her thumb moving rapidly across the screen. A new passcode. She never had a passcode on her phone in the 3 years we're married. "You stay here, earn the money," Linda continued, patting my hand. "You're such a good worker, David. So reliable." Reliable. It sounded like an insult. It sounded like furniture. It sounded like something you bought so you didn't have to think about it. They went. I stayed. I worked. I paid the bills. I realized later, looking back at the photos she didn't tag me in on Instagram, that there was always an extra person in the background. A shadow. Someone who can take photos like her and group shots, but clearly not her unless she mastered telekinesis. In the reflection of a mirror at a seafood restaurant in Da Nang, behind Bob and Linda holding up crabs, there was a shoulder, a tanned, tattooed arm, a pack of Thanglong cigarettes on the table. While I was brewing beer to pay our rent, Sarah was paying for Dewey An's hotels. She was buying his meals. She was renting the motorbikes. She was taking him on the honeymoon we never had, using the salary I earned sweating in the dark. The expats knew. Chloe knew. Mark knew. They smiled at me at dinner parties, drank the beer I brewed, and then whispered about Sarah's boy toy the moment I went to the bathroom. I wasn't their friend. I was the entertainment. I was the fool who kept the lights on so they could play in the dark. The fracture was complete. I was just too busy working to hear the snap.